Welcome to the Great Place to Work webinar. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the various lands on which we all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in today's webinar. I pay my respects to Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. And for our New Zealand participants, I take this opportunity to recognise New Zealand's own unique culture, concepts and values, of which we pay our respects towards and acknowledge here today. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, What Makes a Great Workplace as the World Emerges from the Pandemic. As we grapple with a post-pandemic world, the workplace will look very different to what it looked like in 2019. Great Place to Work's research showed purpose-driven, people-first cultures differentiated the best workplaces from other organisations last year. Characterised by caring leaders who are able to build trust-based relationships by showing an emotional connection with their people, recognising them as individuals, not just employees, the best workplaces thrived during the pandemic. These organisations have emerged with strengthened cultures, making them resilient to the shocks ahead, including the Great Resignation. So what does a great workplace look like as the world emerges from the pandemic? Well, who better to ask than the leaders from two of Australia's best workplaces, DHL Express and CanStar, and an academic with a special interest in research in employee wellbeing and compassion. I'm thrilled to introduce our panellists. Today, we have Linda Clinch, the Vice President of Human Resources at DHL Express Australia. DHL Express was recognised as the #2 in the Best Workplaces Large category in 2021, and also took out the #1 spot in the world's best workplaces last year. Linda has been Vice President of Human Resources at DHL Express since 2006 and holds extensive experience in human resource management across a range of industries. Since beginning her journey in HR management 30 years ago at T&T Express Worldwide Australia, Linda has gone on to work both at operations and strategic levels at some of the world's leading international companies, including United Airlines, Coca-Cola Amatil and News Limited. Linda specialises in change management and culture development programs. In 2012, she was appointed as Deutsche Post DHL Group's project lead for development of the company's global training curriculum. She holds a Master's of Arts degree from Macquarie Graduate School of Management. Welcome, Linda. Lynn Corley is the Chief Operations Officer at CanStar. CanStar was recognised as the #5 best workplace in the medium category of the 2021 Best Workplaces list. Established 30 years ago, CanStar is Australia's biggest financial comparison website, whose purpose is to simplify the world of finance and help consumers confidently find the right product for them. In 2010, CanStar expanded its services and launched CanStar Blue to provide customer satisfaction research and ratings for consumer products and services. Lynn is responsible for fostering the company's culture, as well as developing and leading the implementation of CanStar's operational strategy to drive business goals. With a degree in psychology from QUT and having specialised in organisational psychology, Lynn established the human resource function at CanStar. Lynn has expanded this role in recent years to now head up the entire operations function, leading the people and culture, research, product data, data platform services, and infrastructure teams. Welcome, Lynn.
Welcome.
Associate Professor Ben Farr-Wharton is the Associate Dean of Management at Edith Cowan University School of Business and Law. Ben's research specialises in employee wellbeing and compassion. For the last decade, he's worked with a broad array of organisations across the globe to enhance workplace productivity through wellbeing, inclusion and social safety initiatives. Ben has a nationally recognised research profile in employee wellbeing. His impressive publication record includes 31 highly ranked journal articles in a 6-year period, 6 scholarly book chapters and 1 co-edited book. Welcome, Ben. Our moderator today is Sean Aylmer, one of Australia's most experienced and respected journalists. Sean is the host of the Fear and Greed podcast, and he was editorial director at Fairfax, the most senior journalist in the group. Welcome again to all of our panellists, and I'd like to now hand over to Sean.
Thank you, Sam. Let's jump straight into it. And Linda, I'm going to start with you. How do you think a successful workplace in 2022 will be different to what it was like in 2019 pre-pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Sean, and good afternoon, everybody. For our business, we were classified as an essential service. And so for us, our staff have been working in a constant peak situation since the beginning of 2020. So I think if you asked our staff that question, they would say that by the end of 2022, they hope some normality has returned, because everybody's just been super busy. And so fatigue has been a genuine issue for us. But that has meant that some 65% of staff that are moving shipments in and out of the country and out to our customers and consumers, life continued along the way it had. They had to still come and go from the normal workplace. And then the remaining support staff are the ones that had to immediately pivot and move into work from home. So by the end of 22, we hope to be working, and we plan to be working in a more hybrid environment, some 50-50 between office and home.
But it's a good point, Linda, that you have such a large 65% of your people are on the move anyway. They don't quite have the flexibility that others might have.
That's right. And balancing the people proposition and the employment proposition across that sort of blended workforce, it's been a real challenge. It's been something that we've had to be constantly mindful of. How do we care for our frontline workers who don't have that flexibility and have been out in the community each and every day throughout the pandemic, as well as the people who have been thrust to very quickly having to adapt to working from home and homeschooling and all of those pressures that they've been experiencing over the last couple of years.
We might delve into that a little bit more in a moment, but Lynn, I'm going to you. So the same question for CanStar. What's a successful workplace in 2022? How is that going to be different to 2019?
Yes, well, as we've known, the last 2 years have been very transformative years. And for CanStar, it is also going to be about flexibility. And what we've found is that flexibility is no longer a benefit. It's a necessity for us. And people are valuing flexibility more than ever now. For CanStar, we also are moving towards the hybrid working environment as we start living with COVID. So it'll all be about flexibility for us.
Okay, Ben, I'm going to bring you in on this one because you stand away from it and look down on it a little bit, or up at it, whichever way you want to think about it. How do you think, what is the big change that managers and staff will have to do in 2022 compared to 2019?
Yeah, I think I like to use the word compromise, and I think that everything in 2019 and beforehand was a compromise between the employer and the employee. And compromise was a best fit arrangement, but there was, that negative connotation. People felt compromised. Their time, they're at work when they felt that they should have been at home or should have been allowed to be picking up their kids, but there was the pressure to be at work. Now, I think 2022 onwards, we're looking at a no compromise situation. What we want is to have workplaces that are really conducive to wellbeing, because we know that that's the answer to our productivity gaps. So we're going to have great productivity because of our wellbeing, not in spite of it, as per our previous model.
Which is a very different take. I mean, I think most of us listening today would understand that, when you're at work, you think you should be at home, and when you're at home, you think you should be at work, always feeling guilty about something. That hopefully will actually improve workplaces and people's health as well.
Definitely, you won't feel compromised.
We'll see. Hopefully not. I wanted to talk about the last couple of years and some of the things that we've learned. And maybe, Linda, your organisation is such a big one. How do you manage such a large number of people, and particularly such a diverse workforce that you have? You said, 65, 2/3 are on the road and a third aren't. How do you manage that sort of group of people?
Yeah, it's definitely been challenging. And as a national business, we have always had or strive to have very much high levels of consistency in all of our practices, people practices and work practices. business practices. And that was really challenged with all of the way in which the country was handling COVID, which became very state-based very quickly. And our priority has been about keeping our people safe, and particularly our essential workers, our people, like I said, out in the community, and very much as well our people working from home. And that required very different approaches, and having a state-based approach, quite frankly, just really made that focus on safety have to become so embedded at all levels of the business. So, there's an upside to that. It's been fantastic to have that focus on safety, but very challenging with all the different conditions and restrictions at the same time.
DHL, I'm sure, though, over the years has got a very good safety record, and it's something that you would take very seriously simply because you have people on the road in relatively risky roles compared to the general population. Was there a benefit in the fact that when safety became the number one issue, you already had processes and procedures in place to be thinking about it?
Look, definitely, and it has been a high focus area for our business. You're quite right. I guess it was the constant evolution and so the rapid changes around the rules, that staying on top of all of that and knowing that what we were trying to do for our colleagues in Victoria who were in lockdown versus what our team in Brisbane needed, and being able to have the correct and accurate information for our management teams to be able to work with their teams on. It just required everybody to be very up to date, very current with what was happening at any time of the day.
Yeah, Lynn, CanStar's not as big as DHL, obviously.
No.
But the thing about that is that you probably didn't have the safety policies and procedures. I'm sure you had them in place, but you didn't have to focus on them like DHL. For an organisation like CanStar, and you had to manage all your people, and CanStar has grown really successfully over the last decades.
Yes.
How different was it when COVID hit?
Yeah, so it was very different, and that as we all use the word overused now, is pivoting to a different way of working. We had some safety measures in place, but nothing along the lines that were required for COVID. So we've relied quite heavily on the guidelines that have been given. I think Linda alluded to, there were different guidelines being given by different people. So we based in Brisbane, so based in Queensland, we predominantly sort of went with the guidelines with Queensland, and that's how we communicated to our staff. So we were able to then communicate consistently to them.
Okay, so just keep going on about communicating to the organisation. What were the tangible things that you did, Lynn, to get the message out there?
Yeah, so we trialled all different sorts of communication. So what we found out that, communications has always been vital, but in this instance, it was more vital than ever before. And it was about different communication levels as well. So some people needed communication more than others. Some people, and it was different means of communication. We had the sort of send it by email, but then some people didn't check their emails or didn't have access to them at a certain time. So it was different avenues for communication was really good. And what we found was trying to be as transparent as possible with people and honest. So communication was honest, transparent, and often, and not trying to pretend we knew things we didn't know. But also then letting people know what we did know. And then when we were communicating, it's telling people why we were doing what we were doing, as well as what we were doing. So explaining the why always helps with communication, having people understand why you're doing certain things, as opposed to what you think you should be doing.
Yeah. Ben, I want to bring you in on this. One of the things I noticed from sort of ASX listed companies through to exactly what Lynn was saying, there seemed to be a greater ability for organisations to be totally frank with where they were up to in the world. And sometimes that actually meant saying, we don't know, which to me was a real change during the pandemic. I'm just interested on your view about communicating and how organisations communicated to large groups of people and small groups of people?
Part of it is communication, but there's a deeper foundation to this, and I think that's about vulnerability. And for the first time ever, perhaps, we saw leaders actually being vulnerable. That was something that was not associated with being a strong leader, but we saw leaders confronted with circumstances for which they couldn't control, they couldn't pretend to control, and they couldn't convince people that they were in control of them. And they realised actually the best way to champion support for any action, even if that's agility or pivoting, was to be frank and to be vulnerable and to acknowledge that, because otherwise it would be a lie, it would be fake. And what we learned early on in the pandemic, there was no faking it. You know, what we saw, the comparisons between what was happening with the US and Australia, it quickly became clear that we were progressing much better because of our frankness and our willingness to tackle the problems. So there's certainly an element of vulnerability, which turned out to be our strength. In terms of keeping that clear communication channel, of course, that was absolutely essential, and particularly leaders themselves, so CEOs and executives, doing all of organisational broadcasts, and then that flowing through to managers who are being proactive, calling people, you know, the night before the lockdown, saying staff, you know, we're not in this week, please be safe, please keep yourself safe. So all around a different modus.
Linda, you're nodding on those comments. I presume DHL pretty much, Ben's telling your story in a way.
Yeah. Look, the challenge that we have in our business, regardless of COVID, is the fact that we have some workers who work night shift and work weekends, and then we have workers who are mobile and they're not able to access some of the communication methods that others are, and so forth and so on. It's quite a complex arrangement to try and reach everybody. I think one of the examples that when I was nodding, I was thinking of was our CEO, who's been our CEO for about 18 years. So is a very well-known figure in our organisation and very consistent. And that consistency in communication, and he began an audio message to staff, which was initially every week. And I think that there was a real calming effect that he had, that people know that voice, they know who's behind that voice, and very trustworthy. And the fact that he was speaking very much from the heart, and particularly in those early days when we really were very unsure how it was all going to develop and evolve, was something that really cut through where the written form doesn't always reach everyone. So I think that was just one of those points of difference perhaps in our communication that we introduced then.
Okay, so that's what was. Let's move on to 2022 and what's going to be. I want to talk about workspaces, and Ben, I'm going to throw to you on this one. We're all talking about hybrid work. We're all in meetings like this, Zoom, Teams, etc. What do you think a workplace will look like in 2022 and beyond, Ben, relative to 3 years ago?
So apologies, Sean and everyone. I'm going to start with an in theory, and then I'm going to go in practice. And also responding, we had a Q&A already, which is saying what is flexibility and what is hybrid. And so to be clear, everyone, we need time together, so physically together with staff, and we need time apart to do focus work. Time together is good for coordinative work. So you want to ram through some paperwork, you need some collaboration on a report. You have to be collaborative, you have to be together, or rather you benefit from being in close proximity to each other. We've all been in the circumstance of having back-to-back Zoom meetings and getting a 3-page long email from a staff member who's having a complaint, and you can't, you're bottlenecked by trying to triage those two things. So actually it works better if you can just walk next to her and say, hey, you know, Mike or Jane, let's talk it through. That's a 5-minute call rather than a 2-hour email. So some together time and some apart time. Now, what that might mean in terms of our city structures, our building structures, is we do need collaborative spaces that, of course, are increased ventilation and are going to work in our new world. But we should acknowledge that focus time is not done best when you're in an open office with everyone yelling over each other. That there is a space, there is a productivity boost to making a conscious decision to spend some time apart and coordinating some time together and not having it completely one way or the other. That might be termed hybrid, but really that's what all of the research is saying is the best way for productivity.
I wouldn't mind bringing you, Linda, in on this, and this is directly to a question which has been asked. Exactly what is flexibility? Because the CEO view on flexibility may be very, very different to an employee's view on flexibility and that challenge of marrying the two. Maybe Linda, yeah.
Yeah, I think that we have really, that the hard lessons were learned in 2020 when we had to very quickly adapt, particularly in our call centre environment that we have in Brisbane, which was an office over a couple of floors that has about 300 people working from it, or had about 300 people working from it on any one day, to quickly having to get those people working from home out of that building. And when I say hard lessons, there was just being able to get our hands on enough technology to enable them to be able to do that very quickly. And then there was obviously all the impact of that, particularly in a company that has a very strong culture built around people gathering together and celebrating events and recognition and lots of high fives and noise and activity in the office environments. So that all had to change very quickly. And in terms of, did the CEO or did our senior leaders think differently about that? I would say that wasn't as big a challenge as it was in just physically being able to make it happen. And then once it happened, dealing with, right, what does this mean now around how we communicate, how we connect, how we stay in touch with our teams?
Lynn, do you have anything to add to that, or would you like to add anything?
Yeah. So with that flexibility, and it's a good question about whether different people's idea of flexibility. And I think, luckily for us with CanStar about the flexibility, I mentioned before that it had always been a bit of a focus with being able to offer flexibility, but it was expanded during COVID. And we found, and exactly what Ben had alluded to before, we found that within teams, our communication got better and people worked better within teams. It was across teams to get that collaboration that was a little bit more challenging. And therefore, what we've decided going forward, and once again, the word hybrid has been used quite a bit to explain that, is to have the flexibility for people to come into the office when they need to and collaborate, but then be able to work from home and focus when they need to. However, it does come down to, I think, your CEO and what they expect. And if some CEOs don't have the same idea on flexibility as you do, maybe you need to look at whether you want to be working in that environment or other environments.
Okay, I mean, I'll stay with you, Lynn, and this sort of comes back to Ben's word compromise before, and compromise is from the very top down to everyone in the organisation. Managers are going to need new skills, I'm guessing, in the 2022 world, and
Yes.
they probably can dispense of some of the other ones, like the command and control skills they used to have, perhaps.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think one of the things that has come about, and it's once again, it's been widely written about, is managers with their emotional intelligence. It's working on bringing forth that emotional intelligence. And the good thing is emotional intelligence is malleable. So it can always be worked on. So we really need leaders who can bring their emotional intelligence to the role, and we can dispense with micromanaging. I think it's about micromanaging isn't going to work in this new environment. And the focus is to be, and what we've found successful, and this is what we've found to be successful, is concentrating on outputs. So, when previously may have been in the past, areas where you're looking at inputs, people at time in the office, at the desk, hours worked. Now it's all about, you can't actually see people at their desk. And there has been, lots of articles written, should we monitor, our staff and the hours they're working and, the time that they're on the computer. If you've got to do that, you're not trusting your staff. So it's about outputs rather than inputs. And I find if people are doing too long an hour in inputs, then we need to have a look at what's going wrong there.
Okay. Linda, I'm just interested in your view on the skills that managers will need to be better at and those they can jettison.
Yeah, definitely. There's, I guess, always a long list, but the communication skill, that ability to really connect with an individual when you're not sitting across the desk. So being quite intuitive, listening, I guess, is something that I would put almost at the top of the list rather than telling. So you mentioned command and control. We've been moving away, working in our leadership programs to move very much away from that over the last 10 years. But it really has heightened the need to be, an empathetic listener, leader, rather than I've got the answers and I'm going to tell you how to do your work. The high levels of trust, you have to operate from that as being, you start with trusting people and they only have a chance to lose your trust as opposed to I'll build the trust, you'll build my trust up over time as a leader. The flexibility we've spoken about, care, genuine care for your people as individuals and their circumstances, I guess, and recognition. Really still being that people want to know that they're adding value and that what they do counts. So being recognised for their efforts, I think, is going to continue, has always been strong in our culture and is going to just be even more so into the future. And I absolutely agree that micromanagement gone and moving losing our paradigms of what an office worker is. People work when they are most productive and they'll get where it's possible, they'll get the job done. Even for some people, that's going to be late at night and others early in the morning or somewhere in between.
Ben, I want to get on to the management styles that will work. I'm sure what you've been listening to from Linda and Lynn is something that you have been espousing for well before COVID times. Is it heartening to see it? And then can you give us a little bit of colour on the sorts of management styles that you think will work better?
Sean, I want to say two things to this. I want to support everything that Lynn and Linda have said around compassion, EQ, inclusive listening. But I think there's something that's unsaid in the conversation about flexibility or something that needs to be pronounced a bit more. We need to separate the concept of workload with flexibility. Now, we're talking about flexibility, but there's a subtle implication that we always want people to do more. And we've probably reached a point in 2022 where you can't do more without changing the fundamental structures of when and where we work. And that's what flexibility is creating. So if you want your people to be more productive, if you need more value and more innovation, if you need to be more on time, well, you need to change the way that you're doing things. One of the ways to do that is to let people come into a psychological state of flow. They don't know what time it is. They're not hungry. They've been bashing out that report for 5 hours and they didn't even realise. That's because they're fully engaged and they're working in an environment that's conducive to that. Now, a 9 to 5 big open office is not conducive to flow, or it's not as conducive to flow as giving people the autonomy. So again, taking away the micromanagement, taking away the management of the space, giving people the autonomy to say, this is where I'm going to be productive. I need to do this and I need to do it quickly. That said, there is probably a limit to how much we can keep ramming up the work intensity and expecting the new resource of flexibility to overcome the drain it has on the human body. Because while you don't get hungry during flow, afterwards your energy is massively depleted and you do need a recovery stage. And we actually can't sacrifice that, otherwise we'll kill productivity long term. very long answer to your questions, Sean.
No, I think it's really interesting. One of the questions that's been asked, and I think it's really relevant to what you're saying, and then I'll ask Linda and Lynn to comment. You know, how can you attract people to work 9 to 5 nowadays? You do need to attract people to work set hours still. You still need to open the retail store. You still need to deliver a parcel. You still need an analyst sitting at their desk after data comes out at CanStar so that they can produce something. It's sort of, sometimes I think this whole total flexibility, hybrid workplace works against that a bit.
We are painting everything with the same brush, but we need to acknowledge that a good portion of our GDP is generated by knowledge workers. And knowledge workers generally don't need a physical space. They're not necessarily operating in a face-to-face retail environment. They're not necessarily undertaking manual labour or construction-based work or transport-based work. Knowledge workers in our financial sector, in our health sector, you know, there's a range of knowledge workers. They are driving our GDP at the moment. Our economy is a knowledge economy, and we need to safeguard that. So for a large portion of our economy, this applies, but certainly not for the whole thing.
Okay, Linda, I wouldn't mind your take on it. I'm just going to a little ad in the middle of this though. Ben, someone has just said, great language, Ben, thanks. And that is true. You are giving us words and the vocabulary to explain what we're all trying to get our heads around at the moment. So that is great. Sorry, Linda.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to, I was thinking through this, and one of the things that really comes to me with the flexibility and, you know, how flexible can we really be? We have, you know, we're in the express industry, so we have very tight deadlines. And as I mentioned, we've got a number of employees don't have that degree of flexibility. However, that for those that are the knowledge workers and that can work at night if that's what suits them, I also think about, we work and we have our main offices in big cities that have long commuting times for a number of our staff. And the more that we can give flexibility to them around not having to get into that peak hour traffic. I mean, we don't have to have peak hour as much anymore because if we can embrace this flexibility, but also with, if somebody hasn't got to drive an hour and a half to get to work or sit in a tunnel waiting for it to clear for an hour and a half, and instead they can be at home, that discretionary effort that they just feel that they want to give to their job is enormous, and we have to value that as part of the productivity. And as Ben was saying, not to just keep cranking up the expectation on what they can churn out, but to really acknowledge and appreciate that discretionary effort.
Lynn, I'm going to ask you the same question. We're going to add on here one of the questions that's come through, and it's about supporting people leaders. So it's okay to talk about this, but we're actually expecting more from managers to be able to understand and accept that. So I'm interested in your take on the 9 to 5 piece, but also how you ensure that middle management understand what you want and are able to allow it, for want of a better phrase, and kind of encourage it.
Yeah, so, and look, you know, for CanStar, we don't have the, you know, we don't have a restriction on a 9 to 5, so we're lucky there. However, you will, and I think you pointed out, you know, the analyst who's got to crank out those numbers at the end of the day for a deadline that's got to be hit. You know, the benefit, the luxury that we have is that people are set up from home. However, they do like to stay in the office. So there's still some requirement for people to do that. And I understand within sort of the retail sector, there is the 9 to 5 that's required. I think in those cases also flexibility is around, you need to look at other areas of flexibility. So how are you supporting people in other areas? So it's about building a culture within your environment as well. So maybe it's you can't focus on a change of timing, but there's other things that you can do. So that's just a different way to look at it. And then for managers, and I think our middle managers are dealing with a lot. So they're dealing with managers, you know, above them, they've sort of got to manage up and expectations, and for the team that they're managing at the time, who come with all different ways of working and what's happening in their world. We've got a thing called, we did some research on it, it's called the invisible backpack that people bring to work. And this is the sort of things that you don't know about. And I think we got a little bit of insight into the invisible backpack that is people's lives now during COVID, because the invisible backpack is the fact that, while you're coming into work, you've got a sick child at home, or you've got, parents that you're looking after, or you've got a concern that's going on that you sort of leave at the door and you come to work, you do your job, but that always impacts on you throughout the day. So for middle managers, it's hard. That's happening for their team that they're managing. It's also happening for their leaders. So we found that leaders, some leaders struggled. It just doesn't, because you're a leader, and during this pandemic, it wasn't that you were the ones that were able to sort of switch over and be the heroes and march everyone through. It was struggling to adapt everywhere. So it's been a real challenge for people. And I think what has shone through for me is that the management styles that and Ben was talking to is going to be about that really authentic leader going forward. And I talked about emotional intelligence, and that I said that's part of it, and that real empathy that managers have with people, not the sympathy. So I also saw that where we had some managers who, or people who sort of sympathized more and sort of got drawn into it, but it's having that empathy for people.
Okay, Linda, I'm just interested in your take on middle management and how you ensure that layer are able to do their jobs.
Yeah, and they've definitely been under the pump in our organisation. And so the support that we've provided has been, like a lot of organisations have done, we've really ramped up support of employee assistance programs and workshops and webinars, managing through these times. And we've got management toolkits for those that have had to lead a remote team, with all sorts of tips and tricks. We've definitely focused on them trying to reach out to each other and network. One of the areas that I feel that we've not been able to do as strongly has been some of our leadership training, which wasn't all, the design that we have of that training isn't just as adaptable to move into a virtual setting, although we have made some attempt to do that where we can. We've also had lots of webinars with the senior leaders, keeping that group very much in touch with what's happening, having Q&A sessions so that they feel supported and they know that, that they've got the latest information about what's going on in our business, and that they're armed, I guess, to be able to support their teams in that regard.
Okay, just moving on, Ben.
Sean,
Sorry,
can I make an impassioned appeal? Because this one is really close to my heart. So during the pandemic, we surveyed about 20 large organisations across Australia, really large, I should say. And in each case, we looked at manager stress. Manager stress was higher than usual on all of them, really up. Guys, the sorts of leadership qualities we're talking about, they're not learnt in a 2-hour workshop. They're not learnt in a micro-credential. At the same time, so just quick plug, all of the universities in Australia, they lost their international students, and all of them pivoted to providing the highest class master's level degrees to retrain our manager class. And so what I would invite everyone to do is, if you don't have an MBA, or if your middle managers don't have a master's, please note that universities are not the place that they once were. They have highly flexible options to teach these complex skills. And again, you don't learn it over 2 hours. It takes deep learning, deep reflection, role playing, new sorts of applied new skills, and it all comes together at the end. We need to engage this more. Australia has one of the worst take-ups in the OECD for higher education for our managers. It is our future. It is how we're going to be more productive. Okay.
You sort of touched on what I was going to talk about there, and sort of some of the training and things like that. Something, and then I'm not quite sure that it's probably Linda and Lynn here. One of the questions we have is about data. How do you judge performance? So it is actually easier when you're sitting next to someone to see how they're performing. And it's okay to say, we will judge you on outcomes, but outcomes can be very tenuous. Something can go wrong. How do you do that? And then I'll come to Ben afterwards, because I'm interested in his take on it. So maybe, sorry, Linda.
Okay, so we have a fairly traditional performance management system where we look at both the outputs, which we capture as goals, and then we also look at how we've done that, which we have leadership attributes that we describe. And so it is a balanced way of evaluating performance. And one of my colleagues, we also have management behaviours that we describe, again, to get that balance, that we don't compromise respect in order to get results. And that balance of respect and results is quite strongly ingrained in our business. So, yeah, look, we have evaluated performance through those systems. And because of the geographic spread of our business, a number of our leaders are already remote from their managers. So it's not unusual in our business to be looking at performance through that more remote way. So, you know, I think that we're not perfect. We're definitely not perfect, but there's that high degree of trust absolutely underpins our the way in which we look at performance in our business.
Okay, Lynn?
Yeah, and I'll second that with Linda there on the high degree of trust is what it comes down to, and empowerment of staff, so empowering your staff. But I mentioned before about, measuring the outputs. It's also, and you mentioned, Sean, about, like sometimes the outputs aren't great or there's failures. It's having a look at the progress along the way. So in this virtual, it's checking on the progress, because some things do fail. And as I often say, some things you learn more sometimes from the failures you make, as you go along. So failures are good as long as you learn from them and don't keep making them. So I think it's one of those things is, have a look at the progress that's happening and making sure that people, and checking in again with people that they're comfortable that their outputs are what you're expecting, because and talk to people. It's communication, because you don't want to then be, like disappointed with someone whose, outputs aren't what you think they are, but you haven't taken the time to have a good discussion with them, because they may expect that, what they're giving you is what you are wanting. So it's once again coming back, talking to people, really getting to the bottom of things.
Ben?
Yeah, this kind of metrics and performance is something I'm really passionate about. I've worked with several consulting companies around Australia on working with organisations to build better systems to account for performance. I think what the team is speaking to is important, having these metrics set up that you are including soft measures. But for me, I like to take performance at a much higher level. Often we talk about value creation, so that goes across both public sector and private sector and not-for-profit sector context. And value creation is generally, the equation is efficiency plus effectiveness. And so when we look at efficiency, we want to see that things are running respectfully, they're streamlined, that there isn't wastage in the system, or there isn't surplus wastage. And effectiveness, we're looking for new product generation, new income streams, the existence of current income streams versus last year. And that needs to sit with, the CEO, that needs to sit with executives, and it also needs to be communicated to middle managers about how they work to that and how their employees work to that. And that is what our performance management systems are essentially designed to do. We can't just get focused on soft skills at the expense of profit. What we do want to have is new systems that can show us how we achieve profit through soft skills. And we're certainly there. It does take a kind of next level management lift to comprehend that and build systems that show that.
I mean, there's a few questions here, and it's sort of we're heading towards the end, so I just want to run through them. I think we're talking about culture here, really, and we haven't, I mean, this is the first webinar I've been involved in about 2 years where the word culture hasn't been mentioned yet, right? But Ben, it does come, culture really can create all these circumstances for it to work. A couple of the questions that kind of talk to that, there's one about a 4-day work week, is that the way to go? Another is about how do you actually enthuse someone who's in the office knowing that their colleague is at home, and how do you manage that sort of relationship? There's another question about virtual fatigue for employees. These are all new sorts of challenges for managers, Ben, and I'm just interested in your take on how an organisation can develop a process or a procedure to actually take all this new world into account. Because at the moment, I think lots of organisations are doing the best they can, but just aren't really sure about the playing field.
I don't know if I'm going to give a sensical response, but I think it all comes down to this, and it's not showing up so well. There we are. My friends, I think so much. So the whole world's changed, and it will continue to change, but there's nothing stopping a manager who brings on a new employee, even if they're at a distance, really to rock up and have a coffee. And even if that's in a virtual context, that we have the social lubricant that's appropriate in professional work circumstances, being coffee or tea. And we need to use this relationship building to establish a culture and reinforce it. And that can still be a high performance culture, but built with a social foundation of exchanging life over sharing some coffee beans. So I would say that that's fundamental. I've seen that work in business after business. It's as important as culture and often unmentioned.
Lynn, what do you think of the social lubricant of coffee?
Yes, it's one of my favourites. Thank you, Ben. I agree, catching up with a cup of coffee with people is just, have a chat, check in how people are has been great. When you talk about culture, Sean, I think that has changed a lot over time. And for CanStar, for a place that we had built our offices and our culture around being in the office, being together, working in a nice environment, collaboratively, we had to rethink how we do that. And it was really reassuring to see across all different teams. And I loved it. People did it differently. Different teams did it differently to help continue to build the culture, because I think that's what has been really hard. Is it's harder to build the culture of a team, a full team, when you're all virtual. So we had some really great ideas. We had the virtual escape rooms. We had the Thursday afternoon trivia games. We delivered across the company. We delivered partnered up with T2 and delivered a cup of tea for everybody. So the company all sat down and had a cup of tea together. And so we just had to think outside the box and do it differently. So, but it's still, now that we've started to go back into the office and we're getting going to spend more time in the office, we've still got to work on it and try and think of things differently, because what we were doing before is not necessarily going to work this time.
And Linda, the social lubricant of coffee.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. And one thing I will say about the virtual environments is that, whether it is you're seeing somebody's lounge room, or you're seeing someone's, kids walk across, or dogs bark in the background, or whatever it might be, that's also been a social lubricant. It's been a way of making the relationships a little less formal and enabling people to get to know one another very authentically. We like to use that word too, without sort of the facade of coming to the office and having your cubicle to stand across and chat, or the water cooler to go to. So, there have been upsides of this last couple of years that we've worked through, I think, around how to build rapport, at least, if not deep relationships. So that's just a comment that I'd make. But yeah, look, bringing people together, it's something that DHL loves to do. We love a party. And, we're looking forward. We're actually planning a little welcome back to the office party coming up as we start our transition process back for those people who haven't been around in the buildings as much over the last year or so.
Okay, I'm going to ask all three of you, and I'm going to start with you, Linda. Was there a point, a moment of clarity, an example that during the last couple of years, it really hit home and you understood what you had to do in the future?
I think for us, you know, there's all big organisations have a purpose these days, or a purpose statement and a mission and all the rest. And our purpose is connecting people, improving lives. And, you know, you can do lots of things to promote that to your staff and try and get them to buy into it. But in the last couple of years, our business being involved in the distribution of the vaccine, our people, it really galvanised them to that purpose like nothing else that we've ever tried to do. And that lifted their performance, I feel, and lifted their commitment to our business. So, you know, it's been fortunate, I suppose you could say, but to have been involved in the distribution of over 2 billion vaccines is a pretty powerful way to bring your purpose to life. And it's probably been the biggest aha of the last couple of years.
Great story. What a great story. Lynn, what about you? Was there a moment of clarity for you?
Yeah, that is a great story, Linda. Yeah, so mine's probably a little bit more what personally happened and then being able to transfer it onto other people. And I think it answers the fatigue one that someone was asking just earlier. So when we started to work from home, and at the very beginning, it was all sort of topsy-turvy and, you know, a lot going on. And I realised after probably about a week and a half of working from home that I was sort of getting up and taking the few steps into the shower and then, you know, plonking myself in front of the computer and not looking up until it was dark, you know, and grabbing a bite to eat. That was about it. And then going back and, you know, working some more until, you know, going to bed. And I realised after a week and a half that I hadn't gone out, I hadn't done any exercise, I hadn't even seen the sun for a week. And I was wondering why I was feeling even more fatigued than I probably was before. And I realised that you've got to look after yourself. And so I made an effort to put some time in my diary. So what I did was block it out so that I'd go for a walk, you know, just go for a walk, get some fresh air, get some vitamin D, look after myself, stop and go and eat outside, you know, not in front of my computer. So I had to make a bit of a conscious effort to give yourself, you know, time back to yourself and look after yourself. And so I realised if I was doing that, then other people were doing that too. So I made a conscious effort of talking to all of, you know, got onto each of the teams. So I particularly got into each of our teams meetings throughout their working from home, but up the front, just to make sure they're all looking after themselves and really looking after, we've got, you know, an EAP program, which a lot of others do, but sort of getting all the wellbeing and reminding people about that. So that was a real moment of clarity for me that was able to transfer onto others.
Right. And Ben, I'm not sure whether it's exactly a moment of clarity for you personally or whether it was you observing the workplace and thinking, I think they're getting it now.
Yeah, I mean, we were inundated with emails and Zoom calls. And as I said, I guess when that was really happening with such intensity and you just pick up the call, the phone, and you talk to someone on a call and you realise you solve not just the immediate problem, but the 6 problems that you're likely to get in the form of long emails, just doing that, and how much time you can save by picking up the phone, getting the dog leash and the dog in hand and going for a walk around the block if you can, and just thrashing it out on the phone, how much time that saves. I'd leave with a metaphor. I recently found out that when a beam of light travels from the sun to Earth, it takes 8.3 minutes. But actually that beam of light, its perspective is instantaneous. It arrives having not aged from the sun. When you travel at the speed of light, you don't age and you don't feel time. And this is important for us to realise time is relative. It's not your place to say how much time I put into something and vice versa. We can be highly productive in small amounts of time. And we're just catching up to that in the world of work, how that can exist.
Okay. We almost are out of time. Now, obviously the reason DHL, Linda and Lynn from CanStar are here is because you are a best workplace. So Linda, starting with you, what does being a best workplace by a Great Place to Work mean for you and your organisation?
Yeah, it means a lot. I have to say it means a lot. You know, we've got, again, we want to be an employer of choice. That's an absolute sort of one of our 3 bottom lines for our business. And we have a business strategy that talks about motivated people. And when we get the results back from the survey, which is the questions and the model that Great Place to Work use is so well aligned to our own set of corporate values, and they tell us that we're a great place to work. It just makes the whole journey, you know, really worthwhile, and it is so highly valued. And we know that it tells us that we've got the best people in the industry working in our organisation.
Right. Lynn, what about you in terms of what does the best
Exactly.
workplace look like?
No, we're very proud of the achievement, and like it's a testament to the work that, you know, everyone has done across the company. It's a testament to our staff and our teams. The design of the Great Place to Work really gets to the bottom of why people want to work for you, and it's very highly valued, and it helps us attract and retain people. You know, and it's a retention of people at the moment. You know, with the talk of the Great Resignation, and you know, our focus is also on the Great Retention. So being known as a great place to work is valuable in that, and knowing that our staff actually do value what we're able to do, but also then it helps us attract people who want to work for, you know, with align with our values. So it's highly valued, and it's on the bottom of all of our emails, and even our shirts this year. We get the CanStar shirts every year. We've got the Great Place to Work logo on the back of those this year. So they're all walking around Brisbane and Sydney and Melbourne and New Zealand.
Thank you, Lynn, Linda and Ben. It's been a great discussion. I'm going to hand back to Sam now to do the final farewells.
Oh, thank you, Sean. Thank you so much. And look, I'd like to warmly thank Linda Clinch from DHL Express, #1 world's best workplace, and #2 large best workplace in Australia. Lynn Corley from CanStar, the #5 medium best workplace, and Ben Farr-Wharton from Edith Cowan University, and also, of course, Sean Almer. So thank you all for your insights today, and for talking about your wonderful cultures, your high trust cultures. And now, just before I sign off, I'd just like to do a quick reminder that if you'd like to start your journey towards becoming a great place to work and achieving recognition on the 2022 Best Workplaces list, the first step is to get Great Place to Work certified. It's an easy 2-step process. So please refer to the screen or the chat for details, or feel free to contact me at my personal email address on the next slide. So I'd just like to say thank you to everyone. I'm Sam Huddle, and thank you for joining us.